Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is week 13 of basic Arabic reading. This week we're going to learn about the Hamzat al-Waṣl. In the beginning, when we learn the alphabet, we learned that there's a letter called Hamza, and we learned that it's written like this, and we learned that it has various forms. If you remember, we wrote it sometimes on top of an alif, sometimes on top of a waw, sometimes on top of a ya, and that ya, if it was connected in the middle, it would just be like a little boat, and then sometimes it's written all by itself. But in all cases, we call this a Hamza. Now we're going to learn that the Hamza is actually of two kinds. So let's write Hamza here. All right, there are two kinds of Hamza. We have what's called Hamzatul Qat'. I'll explain what that word means. Hamzatul Qat' and Hamzatul Waṣl. These little dots that I've written here, they're to help indicate the way the Arabic is actually written, because of course T could be a ta, it could be a ta. So this little dot here indicates that it's a ta that's meant, not a ta. This little C sign indicates an ayn. So if I write this in Arabic, this would be Hamzatul Qat', and this one would be Hamzatul Waṣl. Okay, now why are they called Qat' and Waṣl? Qat' means to cut off something, to separate it. Waṣl means to connect it. Alright. Now, Hamzatul Qat' is what we learned until now. It's that symbol that we saw up here at the top of the page. It's always written like this, or one of those variant forms of that. So let's put it on top of an alif, because that's how we often see it in its separated form. So this Hamza now is called Hamzatul Qat'. The other form of Hamza, which we're going to learn today, is called Hamzatul Waṣl. It's also written on top of an alif, and it's this little squiggly sign here. Now, where do these two symbols come from? They come from the name Qat' and Waṣl. What Arabs have done in their convention, they've taken the word Qat' and they've taken the ayn here at the end of the word Qat'. And if you imagine an ayn like this, and then you just take the very top, the head of the ayn, that's the symbol, that's the sign they've used for the symbol of Hamzatul Qat'. Waṣl is the same way. If you look at the way I've written Hamzatul Waṣl here, if you take the sad from the middle of Waṣl and kind of stylize it, that's where you get this little symbol. It's basically the head of a sad written on top of an alif for Hamzatul Waṣl. Alright, so again, these are not alifs. We should never call them alifs. The first one is Hamzatul Qat'. And we learned that Hamzatul Qat' comes in different forms, all these different variations at the top of the page. Hamzatul Waṣl, on the other hand, is always written on top of an alif. Now, what's so special about Hamzatul Waṣl as opposed to Hamzatul Qat'? Hamzatul Qat' is always pronounced regardless of whether it's the first thing you're saying or you're connecting from something else and you're kind of joining it with what came before it. So, for instance, let me give you an example. If I want to say ya, I want to call out to someone named Adam, and I say ya Adam. Let's put all the harakat so you can read it. Ya Adamu. Alright, so here I have a long vowel, and I'm going to connect it to the word Adam, which starts with a Hamzatul Qat'. Right? So until the way we've been pronouncing it until now is correct. We've been saying Ya Adamu, and so you hear that Hamza. I'm making the sound of the Hamza, and nothing is silent, nothing gets blended. Alright, now let's compare it to the Hamzatul Waṣl. Let me write the word al-Qamaru. Alright, now al-Qamaru, and we'll put the Hamzatul Waṣl sign here. First of all, you'll notice Hamzatul Waṣl never has a haraka on it. And that's going to cause a problem that we have to deal with. We're going to have to learn rules to know what haraka to put on Hamzatul Waṣl, because Hamzatul Waṣl never has a haraka written on it to tell you how to say it, whether to say al, il, or ul. But again, I'll teach you some rules that will help you to determine that. Right now, just know, I'm going to go ahead and write a fatha here just so that we can know how to pronounce it. This word is now al-qamaru. Al-qamaru. You'll notice there's no difference just yet. I'm pronouncing the hamza sound there at the beginning of the word, just like I did up here in ya adamu. You hear the there and the here. So what's different? What's different is if I want to connect this, say if I want to put another word in front of this, I want to say wa al-qamaru. Now what happens, let's remove this fatha. Like I said, it's not going to actually be there anyway. So now what's going to happen when I connect the waw to al-qamaru, the hamza is going to become silent. Instead of saying wa al-qamaru, I'm going to say wal qamaru. And I'm going to connect from the waw over to this lam. Wal qamaru. And the hamza becomes totally silent. That is the difference between hamzatul qat' and hamzatul wasl. Hamzatul qat', it's always in a way cut off and separate from what comes before it, so it never becomes silent. It's always pronounced as you would expect it to be pronounced. Whereas hamzatul wasl, whenever it's connected to what comes before it, it's going to disappear. It's going to become silent, and you'll treat it as a silent letter. Now that we know what the hamzatul wasl is, and we know how it's different from hamzatul qat', and we know that in isolation, when you're not connecting it, hamzatul wasl is pronounced just like a hamzatul qat'. And when it's connected, it's not pronounced at all, it becomes silent. All right, that's good. That's one step. Now what we need to do, we need to understand the rules to determine how to pronounce hamzatul wasl in various circumstances. Because as I mentioned, hamzatul wasl is never going to have a haraka written on it. So we're not going to know, unless we know these rules, we're not going to know whether to put a fatha, a dhamma, or a kasra on it. There are 3 rules that are going to help us to determine what haraka to put on it. All right, so rule number 1 for hamzatul wasl is, whenever you have hamzatul wasl in the structure hamza lam or alif, sometimes people call it alif lam, and by habit I also do that because it's so common for people to say alif lam, even though it's hamza lam. This hamza lam is the equivalent of the English definite particle the. And you'll see it at the beginning of many words in Arabic. Al-Qamar, Al-Kitab, Al-Kursi, and so forth. That alif lam is, or hamza lam, is the equivalent of the particle the. Now, whenever you have hamza lam at the beginning of a word, you'll know, the rule 1 is going to tell us that we're going to put a fatha in our mind. Again, it's not written, but in our mind, we're going to put a fatha on the hamza and read it as al. Just like the examples I just gave you. Al-Qamar, Al-Kitab, Al-Kursi, for instance. Right? So in all those, because we have this hamza lam at the beginning, we're going to put a fatha on it. Rule number 2 says that if you ever have this pattern where you have a hamza followed by a letter with a sukoon on it, followed by a letter with a dhamma on it. Whenever you have this pattern, you are going to, in your mind, put a dhamma on the hamzatul wasl. So for instance, if you were to see this word udhkur. Right, well, I pronounced it the way it's supposed to be pronounced, but you see that in the beginning of the pattern, we have hamzatul wasl with no haraka, we have a dhal with a sukoon on it, and we have a kaf with a dhamma on it. So we have that 3-letter pattern there. That tells us that we're going to put a dhamma in our mind on the hamza and pronounce it udhkur. Udhkur. Alright, that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is going to be basically everything else. If neither rule 1 nor rule 2 applies, then rule 3 tells us we're going to put a kasra under it. Alright, so that's going to be a couple of different scenarios. We might have instances where we have, for instance, let me give you one example. Alright, so we have this example. Let me give you one other example. Okay, so here are two examples. In the first one, if we try to apply rule 1, we see no, it doesn't apply because it's not Hamza Lam. In the second one also, it's not Hamza Lam, so rule 1 doesn't apply at all. Rule 2 doesn't apply because I don't see that pattern. There's no dhamma on the third letter. There's a fatha in this one and there's a kasra in this one. So rule 2 doesn't apply either. So I apply rule 3, which tells me to put a kasra on each of these. Again, in our head, because it's not actually written there. And so the first one I would say i'lam, and the second one idrib. Alright, so those are the three rules that we have to use in order. Remember, because rule 1 and rule 2, if they don't apply, then you have to go to rule 3. So you need to learn them in order. And unfortunately, in the textbook, they've switched the rules. Rule 2 and rule 3, they've switched them. So I'd prefer if you would learn my order, because I think this is more helpful. When they teach it the other way, and they say first look at apply rule 1, then they say rule 3, and then they come to rule 2, then they have to say, oh, but there are all these exceptions. Right? Where if you learn it this way, in this order, then you don't have to deal with all those exceptions. Until now, we know how to pronounce the Hamzat al-Waṣl if it's connected, meaning we don't pronounce it at all because it becomes silent. We know how to pronounce it when you start a word with the Hamzat al-Waṣl using rules 1, 2, and 3. There's one more rule we need to learn before we can read the exercises for this week. As part of rule 1, where we have that Hamzat al-Waṣl followed by the lam, so now we know from the previous discussion how to pronounce the Hamza. The additional difficulty we have, though, is that the lam is pronounced in two different ways. And so we need to learn some rules for whether or not to pronounce the lam. And this is sometimes known as the discussion of sun letters and moon letters. All right, let me start by giving you these two examples. I'm going to start with a moon letter. Alright, so let's look at this word al-qamaru. Okay, the word al-qamaru, it's clear enough. We know how to pronounce the Hamza because of rule number 1. The lam has a sukoon on it. Everything's straightforward. If you pronounce it like you would normally pronounce it before today's lesson, you would say it perfectly right. Al-qamaru. The problem comes, though, in words like this next one. Ash-shamsu. Right. It also has a Hamza lam at the beginning. But you'll notice that the lam has no sukoon written on it. You'll also notice that the next letter, the sheen, has a shadda written on it, whereas the qaf up here had no shadda. This word, and words that are similar to this, they are pronounced a little bit differently than the one at the top. These are called, like a sheen is called a sun letter. And the reason it's called a sun letter, first of all, is because this word, ash-shams, means the sun. Right? So any letter and any word that acts like this particular word, it's known as a sun letter because it acts like the word for sun. And any word that starts with a letter that acts like this, al-qamar, is known as a moon letter because al-qamar means moon. So these two words have become kind of the prototypical examples based on which these two categories of letters are kind of given. So the 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet, they're split into two groups, 14 and 14. 14 of them are going to be sun letters, and 14 of them are going to be moon letters. And all of those that are sun letters are going to act like ash-shams when they come after Hamza lam, and all of the ones that are moon letters are going to act like al-qamar when they come after Hamza lam. All right, how do I pronounce this? What's different about this? What happens whenever you have this sort of structure? What you're going to do is you're going to skip over the lam, treat the lam as a silent letter, and simply double up the next letter, the sheen. So instead of saying al-shamsu, we're going to say ash-shamsu. Ash-shamsu, and the lam is now silent. All right, so that's an additional rule that we have to deal with. Besides the rule for how to pronounce the Hamza, now we have to deal with how to pronounce the lam. And the notation is going to be key. You don't have to memorize the moon letters and the sun letters. That's not necessary. All you have to do is look at the notation. If you see the notation looks like al-qamaru, where you have a sukoon on the lam and no shadda on the next letter, then you pronounce it like this, al-qamaru. If there's no sukoon on the lam And there's a shadda on the next letter that you pronounce it like this, ash-shamsu. All right, so now with all of that, we can look at today's exercises. In Unit 33 on page 85, line 1, this, if you notice the way it's written, it looks like ash-shams. The lam has no sukoon, the dal has a shadda on it. So we're going to skip the lam. The hamza, we're going to put a fatha on it because we have hamza lam. So we're going to say ad-dini. Ad-dini. All right, that's if we were to pronounce it all by itself. However, it's connected to the word before it. So now our other rule and our other understanding of what Hamzat al-Waṣl means comes into play. We're going to make the hamza also silent, and we're going to connect the meme all the way to the dal. Yawmiddini. So now you see the hamza is silent, the lam is silent, and we skip straight from the meme to the dal. The next example the same way. Let's start by pronouncing the second word. Alladhina. We have hamza lam at the beginning, so we put a fatha on the hamza. Alladhina. However, when we connect it to the previous word, we lose the hamza. Siratalladhina. And the last example on line 1. Al-maghdubi. But now when we connect it, غير المغضوب. Line 2. رب هذا البيت. Alright, now here we're ending up with a silent alif here as well. And this is another lesson to kind of squeeze into today's lesson. And that is, if you were to pronounce this middle word all by itself, you would say هذا with 2 long alifs. هذا. However, the rule is whenever you have a long vowel followed by a letter with a sukoon on it, you're going to lose that long vowel. So هذا, the alif gets chopped off and you're going to join the dhal to the lam. هذا البيت. رب هذا البيت. The same thing happens in the next one. It was yorbi with a long ya, but now it's followed by a sad, which is basically one sad has a sukoon and one sad has a fatha. So we're going to lose the ya. Yurbis sadaqati. Alright, in line 3, I want to skip over the first 2 examples. We're going to have a separate chapter for how to pronounce these 2 words coming up next week. Right now, let's look at the third example on line 3. Alhamdu. This is a moon letter, ha. It acts like al-qamaru. Al-malikul quddusu. Line 4. الذي أطعمهم. Here we have one of those mads on the ya because it's followed by a hamza. الذي أطعمهم. الذين هم. الذي. التي. Alright, so far we basically with the hamzas we've had rule 1. If we were to pronounce the hamza, we'd put a fatha on all those hamzas in lines 1 through 4. Now in line 5, we're going to see instances where rules 2 and 3 come into play. Line 5. Iqra. Now I put kasra here. Rule 1 doesn't apply. Rule 2 doesn't apply because there's no dhamma here on the third letter. So definitely it's rule 3. So I put a kasra on the hamza. Iqra. Idhhab. If'alu. This alif at the end with a 0 over it, that's a silent letter. We're going to have another separate chapter for silent letters. But for right now, just make a mental note that this is a silent letter. It's grayed out. We don't pronounce it at all. If'alu. Line 6. Ihdi. Again, this is rule 3 because neither rule 1 nor rule 2 applies. Ihbitu. Again, we have that silent alif at the end, so ignore that. Isbiru. Line 7. Udhkuru. This is rule 2. We have that pattern of Hamza, Sakin, Dhamma, right? So that's going to give us rule 2. Udhkuru. Usjudu. Uqtulu. Urkud. Line 8. Wasbir. Now this word, if we were to pronounce it, take off the waw, then you'd apply rule 3, because neither rules 1 nor rules 2 apply. Isbir. However, because we're connecting it to a waw, the hamza becomes silent. Wasbir. The same thing in the second one. It would be i'lamu. But now with the waw, the hamza becomes silent. Wa'lamu. And in the last example, we have this long ya in the, but because it's followed by a sukoon over here, we're going to drop the ya. The ya becomes silent. Dhil awtadi. Dhil awtadi. And in line 9, we have silent letters, a waw, an alif, waw, and also a waw in the last example. Dhal jalali. Dhul arshi. Wa'amilu salihati. Unit 34, page 87, is simply going to give us a chance to practice our sun letters and moon letters. So lines 2 through 4 are all moon letters, and lines 5 through 7 are sun letters. Alright, let's start with line 1. This is actually a verse from the Qur'an, 2 verses combined together. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. Line 2. الأول الآخر الباب الجمل الحمد. Line 3. الخوف العظيم الغفور الفتاح القدير. Line 4. الكريم الملك الهدى الودود اليمين. Alright, those are all moon letters acting like al-qamaru. Now with line 5, we're going to have words that act like ash-shamsu. At-tawwabu. So you see that the lam has no sukoon, so we skip over it, and the next letter has a shadda on it. At-thawabu. Ad-daru. Al-dhikru. Ar-Rahmanu. Line 6. Az-Zaytuni. As-Samawati. Ash-Shamsi. As-Salatu. Line 7. Ad-Dalalu. Al-Turi. Al الظل الليل الناس. Line 8. هو الرحمن بالناس أقم الصلاة. Line 9. Now line 9, what's happened is the Hamza has already been omitted for us. There was actually a it would have been ar-rijali with a Hamza and then a lam. Because it's not pronounced in these in this structure, the Hamza is omitted from writing as well, which is fine by us. It's a silent letter, so it doesn't make any difference. But that's what they're trying to show here. And that's why this lam is omitted. This is actually a sun letter. The ra is a sun letter. It's just a little bit confusing because you don't have the Hamza lam there to remind you that this is a sun letter. للرجال للنساء للرحمن للظالمين. Alright, so I know that's a lot of material about the Hamza, but I didn't want to teach it to you in bits and pieces. So inshallah, go over the lesson and we'll practice all of these in the live session this following week. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.